Welcome to Midnight Murmurs, where the shadows come alive and the darkness whispers tales of terror. Tonight we take you on a journey down a desolate highway where one man's routine drive spirals into a nightmare. Hold on tight, because the midnight encounter will make you think twice before picking up a stranger on a lonely road. It was a dark night, the kind where shadows stretched long and ominous, where the wind whispered secrets to the trees, and the only source of light was a sliver of the moon, a thin crescent that followed his car from behind the skeletal branches of trees. The road was a forgotten stretch of highway, winding through a dense forest, the kind of place where travelers rarely ventured, especially at this hour. Yet, as he drove through the endless night, he found himself strangely at peace with the solitude. The man behind the wheel was in his mid-30s, ruggedly handsome in a way that spoke of a life lived on the road. His stubble was a few days old, and his eyes, though sharp, held a certain weariness. His name was Jack, and he was a trucker by trade, though that barely scratched the surface of who he truly was. Jack had been on the road for days, delivering goods from one state to another, his life a never-ending cycle of highways and rest stops. But tonight, something felt different. The first sign of something unusual was when he noticed her. Even before his headlights reached her, he saw the girl standing by the side of the road. She was wearing a prom dress, a splash of deep red in the dark night, with sequins that glittered like stars as his truck approached. The dress was the kind you'd expect to see in a ballroom, not on a deserted highway at 2 in the morning. Her arm was outstretched, thumb up, as if it were the most natural thing in the world to be hitchhiking in the middle of nowhere. Jack's instincts told him to keep driving. He had a strict rule about hitchhikers: he never picked them up. It was too risky, especially in this line of work. But something about the girl made him hesitate. The next town was almost 20 miles away, and he hadn't passed another vehicle in over half an hour, and she was just a kid, stranded in the middle of nowhere. It was what he should do. He slowed the truck and pulled over to the side of the road. As the truck came to a stop, he rolled down the passenger window. The girl walked up to the window, stepping through the darkness until the cab light illuminated her face. What a pretty face it was, pale and delicate, with wide, bright eyes and a smile that was both innocent and knowing. Her dark hair was styled up, with a loose curl that bobbed in front of her face as she leaned down to speak to him. "Need a lift?" Jack asked, his voice gruff from hours of disuse. "That's what the thumb was for," she replied, her voice light and melodic. Jack nodded. "Hop in." The girl's smile widened as she tugged the door open and climbed up into the passenger seat. Her movements were graceful, almost too fluid, and the loose strand of her hair brushed against his arm as she settled into the seat beside him. "Seatbelt," he said automatically, his eyes flicking to her bare shoulders and the pale skin of her arms. She grinned and clicked the seatbelt into place as Jack pulled the truck back onto the highway. They drove in silence for a few minutes, the only sound the rumble of the truck's engine and the occasional rustle of the trees outside. Jack was used to the quiet, it was part of the job. But tonight the silence felt different, heavier somehow. "Where are you coming from?" the girl asked, breaking the silence. "I've been all over," Jack replied, his voice low. "But today, I'm coming from Dallas." "Long haul," she said, her tone casual, as if they were old friends making small talk. Yep, Jack kept his eyes on the road, his hands gripping the steering wheel a little tighter. There was something about the girl that made him uneasy, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. He'd been on the road long enough to know that some people just had that effect. But this felt different. It was as if she were hiding something he couldn't see but could almost sense. The girl looked out the window, her gaze following the passing treetops and the stars beyond. "Why were you standing on the side of the road in the middle of the night?" Jack asked, his curiosity getting the better of him. "It's a long story," she said, glancing at her nails. They were painted the same deep red as her dress, and her fingers were pale and slender, her wrists so narrow he could easily wrap one hand around both of them. "Boy trouble," Jack guessed, trying to lighten the mood. "You could say that," she replied, a small, mysterious smile playing on her lips. Jack frowned, his mind racing with possibilities. Was she running away? Had she been to a prom that went wrong? Or was there something more sinister at play? He shook his head, trying to push the thoughts away. It wasn't his business. His job was to get her to the next town. Nothing more. "You live in the next town?" he asked, trying to keep the conversation going. "Used to," she said, her voice soft, almost wistful. "Well, where am I taking you?" he asked, glancing at her briefly before returning his focus to the road. "Wherever," she replied, leaning her head against the window. Her eyes were half closed, her expression serene. Before we dive deeper into this unsettling encounter, what do you think is going to happen next? Will Jack discover the truth about the mysterious hitchhiker, or is something far more sinister waiting in the shadows? Let us know your theories in the comments below. And if you're as intrigued as we are, don't forget to hit that like button and share this video with someone who loves a good scare. Jack stared at her neck, and a familiar urge began to crawl up his spine. A dark, insidious desire that tickled the edges of his mind. He clenched the steering wheel, forcing himself to look away. No way, he thought to himself. Not after last time. He had a past, one that he kept buried deep within. But sometimes, the memories clawed their way to the surface. Jack had always struggled with the darkness inside him, a darkness that had led him down a path of violence and bloodshed. But he had sworn to himself that he would never go back, that he would never let the monster inside him take control again. Not after what happened last time. The truck rumbled down the highway, the road ahead stretching out like a ribbon of black velvet. Jack glanced in the rearview mirror and watched the crescent moon skirting along the treetops. He looked over at the girl again, her bare shoulders and arms smooth and pale as ivory. "You cold?" he asked, trying to distract himself. "I keep the AC high to stay awake." "I'm fine," she said, stretching out her arm. "Look, not even a goosebump." Jack couldn't help but stare, transfixed by her porcelain skin, the elegant lines of her wrist, and the thought of the hot blood flowing in those cool, blue veins. He tore his eyes away and saw the intersection ahead. He pressed the brake and slowed down just in time to make the turn onto a gravel road that led deeper into the woods. "Where are we going?" the girl asked, her voice calm, almost curious. "Need to make a pit stop," Jack said, offering her a reassuring smile. The truth was, he needed to get away from the highway, away from the prying eyes of anyone who might pass by. The darkness was calling to him, whispering in his ear, urging him to give in to the urges he had tried so hard to suppress. The truck drove along the narrow, dusty road, the trees closing in on either side. It was so dark, nothing seemed to exist beyond the glow of the headlights. Jack pulled over to the side and stopped the truck. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. "I'll just be a minute," he said, his voice tight. He got out of the truck and walked around to the back, the gravel crunching under his boots. As he passed through the red glare of the taillights, he pulled the knife from his belt. It was a hunting knife, long and sharp, with a handle worn smooth from years of use. Jack had used it before, and the memories of those times flashed through his mind, each one a reminder of the monster he had tried to leave behind. He yanked the passenger door open and grabbed the girl by her slender wrist, hauling her out of the seat with a rough jerk. She staggered as her bare feet hit the gravel, but Jack kept her from falling, holding her close to him. His heart was pounding in his chest, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. He looked down into her wide eyes, searching for the fear, the terror of realization. But all he saw was that same cheerful brightness, that unsettling calm. "What the hell?" Jack muttered, his voice trembling. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He had done this before, and the girls had always been terrified, their fear feeding the darkness inside him, pushing him to the brink of ecstasy as he watched the life drain from their eyes. But this girl was different. He jammed the knife into her chest, expecting to feel the familiar resistance of flesh and bone. He had done this a dozen times before, and he knew the sensation well, the knife sliding between ribs, the sudden gush of hot blood, the look of shock and horror as they realized what was happening. But this time, there was no resistance, no blood, no fear. The girl just smiled up at him. "What the hell?" Jack said again, his voice barely a whisper. He pulled the knife out, but before he could stab her again, she caught his wrist. Her grip was like iron, her pale fingers closing around. Thanks for joining us in the darkness tonight. If you enjoyed the Midnight Encounter, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon to never miss a new tale from Midnight Murmurs. And remember, the next time you're driving alone at night, keep your eyes on the road and beware of who you might find on the side.